All right, welcome to Professional Leadership. In this class session, we're going to go over, kind of work through the model a little bit. We're going to go through the first kind of section. So if you remember, in last week's video, we talked about the three sections: modeling behavior, executive decisions, and then defining expectations, right? Are the three kind of main components of this model. And so today we're going to start with the modeling behavior discussion. And so the idea is that leaders are responsible for creating the culture of an organization, right? And so there are two ways to do that. One is by sending out memos and making public statements, or having a company mission statement, things like that you have put out publicly to define what you expect your culture to be like. But the more effective thing, I mean, it's important to have those things. You need to put that stuff out there. But at the same time, the modeling of your behavior, right, as a CEO has a trickle-down effect, right? So that people tend to pick up on culture from other people more than they pick up on it from literature, right? So if you've got, tucked away somewhere a company mission statement, that's going to have a minimal effect when compared with the influence of individuals within the organization on other individuals, right? So however somebody acts begins to affect how other people act, and the combined influences that everyone in the company is having on each other is the culture of the company, right? And so because culture is so connected with influence, right? How I treat this person is picked up on by other people, right? And they begin to treat other people based on the way that I have treated this person. And if it's the company culture to be respectful always to other people, and a new person comes in and they see that everyone is respectful of each other, then they will adopt that personality, they will adopt that character trait because they want to fit in, they want to do what's right, typically, right? And then if they don't, then it becomes very clear that they don't fit into that culture, and it becomes very clear as a leader what human resources decisions need to be made, because you have a clearly defined culture, and it makes it easier to know when somebody fits and when they don't. But the idea for this lesson is that culture is created out of the mutual influences that we have on each other. And there is no single influence greater than the leader's influence on the people that are following. And so typically what happens in an organization is any one person may have a sphere of influence of 10 to 20 people, right? Of direct influence, right? Now the leader obviously has influence over everyone to a certain respect, but in a large company, a lot of people could go their entire life, work at a company for 20 years and have never met the top leader. If you're working at Disney, you may have never met the CEO. If you're working at General Motors, you may work in a factory at General Motors for 40 years, retire, and have never met any of the executives from the company. So while top leaders have influence over everyone in terms of their decision making, in terms of their policy creation, they may not have direct influence over more than about 10 or 20 people. And so what I mean by direct influences are the people that are close enough that the behavior you model rubs off on them, right? And so it's very difficult for anyone to be close enough, just because of time restraints and just the way life is, to model and influence more than about 10 to 20 people or so on a regular basis, right? Now, every day we have interactions with people that affect them and that influence them. But for the most part, you will have a sphere of people around you that you are directly influencing, that you have a significant impact on their life. So as the leader, that is typically maybe your board and your top executives, maybe some assistants that work directly with you. And so it is your influence over them that is crucial, because it's their influence over the next level of leadership that begins to create the culture, right? And so it has to be passed down. It has to have a trickle-down effect. And so as a leader, you are wanting to do two things. You're wanting to influence the people closest to you so that they begin to act in the way that you are trying to model, right? And you have to kind of push them, if you will, the people around you, to model that same behavior for the people around them, to create the trickle-down effect. You have to make it known that you expect the trickle-down effect, that you don't want that to chance. You want to make sure that you're pushing that. You know, whenever you're dealing with your people, you want to make sure that they are consciously trying to replicate culture in the same way that you are consciously trying to replicate culture, right? So don't just assume that if you have it in your mind that you want to replicate culture within your organization, that everyone else is thinking that way. It has to be intentional, I guess, is the best way to say that. Intentional on your part to reach your people that are around you, and intentional on their part to spread it. So you have to make sure that you are creating that expectation. And so over the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about what I call the 4 fundamental behaviors, character traits, if you want to call that, that you need to model, right? Now, in my estimation, there are 2 levels of character traits, right? There are the 4 foundational ones that we are going to talk about in more detail, right? And then after that, there are what I call secondary traits that are also important for leadership that are not necessarily foundational. So let me give you an example. A foundational trait, the one we're going to talk about today, is integrity, right? That you can't have good leadership without integrity, right? A secondary characteristic is charisma. And I think not understanding the difference between foundational and secondary traits is what leads to so much confusion within leadership, because for a long time people think, well, you know, you have to have a charismatic leader, but then they've come to find out that that's not always true. So what do you do with charisma? That some leaders are very effective and very influential, but they have a more conservative demeanor. They're not charismatic. But then yet you have some leaders who are charismatic. So does that mean that you throw charisma out the window as having no influence or no value? So I don't think you can do that, right? But I think you do need to make a distinction between what is foundational. And a foundational characteristic is one that has to be there for leadership to be effective, right? A secondary trait is something that if the foundational traits are there, can amplify it, right? So if you have the 4 foundational character traits in a strong way, then some of these secondary traits, like charisma, would serve to amplify it, right? So if you have a great leader who's got integrity and a great attitude, they're very productive, if you add charisma to that, it will amplify what they're already doing, right? But if they don't have charisma, they can still be highly effective, because the foundational leadership traits are what create effectiveness, and there are often secondary traits that can amplify and magnify that level of effectiveness. But if they're not there, they don't derail leadership either, right? That you can have effective leadership built on these 4 foundational traits that we're going to talk about, that can weather just about any storm, and you can add a lot of secondary things to it, you know. But if you don't have these 4 foundational traits, then the secondary traits can't carry the load, right? If you don't have these 4 foundational ones and you have a lot of charisma, then you become a shallow leader.